So this is that time of the year when, for those of you who have, I guess leases that begin July 1st, which is what most people have, you're going to start to get notices from your landlord letting you know that, your rent might be going up, or some services that you were paying for before or you were getting before may not be included going forward. The question then becomes, so how do you handle this as the tenant? Margaret van Noten is social rights worker with Project Genesis. She's on the line. Margaret, thanks so much for the time. Let me begin by asking, first of all, if you have a July 1st lease, that's when it kicks in. My understanding is landlords will have right up until April 1st to let you know that things are going to change. Is that correct?
That's right. It has to be before, by the last day of March, they have to send it to you. You might receive it only in the first days of April, but they have to get it out to you by the end of March. Yeah.
How long do you then have from the time you receive it to answer, contest, whatever you're going to do next?
Then you have one month to respond.
Okay. So let's cover a couple of different scenarios here. First of all, let's say, because more commonly you might be, or your landlord might be looking for a rent increase. What do you do when that's the case and you're saying, you know what, obviously you can accept it should you want to, but if you want to contest it, what's the next step for you as the tenant?
Well, you sort of, want to evaluate whether or not the tribunal would deem it to be a reasonable rent increase. And the guidelines have the way they're setting it is a bit different this year. They've changed the system. So there's a base amount of 3.1% that takes into account, we would say, fluctuations in inflation and small increases to insurance or municipal taxes, school taxes. And so if there hasn't been any major work on the dwelling, minimal upkeep expenses, then the increase should be less than 3.1. And so you would evaluate if you're below the 3.1, it would be probably wise to accept the increase. And if it's in that ballpark, then it might be justified. And if it's significantly above that, then you probably would have questions as to, what kind of extraordinary expense might be cited to justify that kind of increase. And then you would have to get a written notice out if you wanted to contest. And that written notice you have to make sure that the landlord receives it. So you have to actually be able to have the proof of the reception of the registered letter, or if you send by regular email, because there's also registered email, you would have to make sure that the landlord responds so that you are able to prove that they did receive the notice. And then, of course, some people use a bailiff to send the refusal.
So I want to understand, have you come across cases where a tenant has in fact sent a letter back, whether it be registered mail or not, and then the landlord just simply says, well, I never received that, and that's the end of it?
That actually happens fairly often, and that's especially it can be a danger with email, because more and more landlords and tenants are corresponding now by email. But with regular email, even if you can show that you sent an email, and even if you use that little feature that your email might have to say, ask for a read receipt, the landlord could say that they haven't received your email. But commonly what happens, unfortunately, is that landlords don't pick up the registered letter, and then by the time you get that registered letter back, because it will be sent back to you from Canada Post, you might be outside delay, and you would have to try and serve it on the landlord, probably by another method. Try something like registered email or a bailiff if you have the means. So it can be tricky. You do have, and we have a number of people who feel that they've refused a rent increase, and then they have a nasty surprise when the new lease term starts that the landlord institutes eviction proceedings against them because they're not paying the increase.
Claiming never to have received their
That's right, the refusal, exactly, yeah.
So look, I was going to ask you best bet. If email's not your best bet, and I can certainly see how someone will say, well, I didn't see it, I didn't get it. Even registered mail you're suggesting, if that thing isn't picked up, then again, you have no proof it was received. So what do you do as a tenant?
Well, if you're really creative and have time, if you're able to locate your landlord in person, you could have somebody go and film you giving it to them by hand. But that's not usually a very realistic scenario. You would have to send it by bailiff, and landlords themselves are using bailiffs more and more, but it's quite expensive. You could easily be looking at $100 for having a document served by bailiff.
Okay.
So that's really not the... You hope that it won't come to that, and so that's, you hope that the landlord will pick up the registered mail.
If I can just go back to this 3.1% that you said is now sort of the level for this year, is that only if work has been done that they can justify that, or can your landlord just say, you know what, I'm allowed to ask for 3.1 and I'm asking for 3.1% more?
You're right on the latter. The landlord is allowed to ask 3.1, and there doesn't have to be any justification of any additional expenses. So that means that certainly it's expected that base rate, as it were, is going to change every year, but 3.1 is quite a bit actually added on to, like, many tenants last year and the year before. Many tenants had 5%, 6%, 7% increases that were granted, and obviously people's incomes are not going up at this rate. So a landlord will, with the new system, which just does have this base amount that doesn't have to be justified, which is unlike the way the tribunal used to work, where some people would sometimes end up with almost no increase, less than 1%.
And then just as a final question, should you choose at the end of this, you, the tenant, not to renew or not to accept the rent increase, you go to the rental board, you go to the TAO, how lengthy a procedure is that, and what kind of window do you need to make that happen?
Well, that you just would have to send your notice within the delay, within the month that you would have to send that notice, again, making sure that the landlord has received it. And so you just have to say, I won't be renewing my lease, and that should take care of that.
But again, with proof that he's received the fact that you're not going to agree?
That's
I'll go back to that again.
Yeah.
Okay. Not as easy as I thought.
I'm Luke Wilson. Join me each week for Film Never Lies. Since retiring from the NFL, I've had a lot on my mind, and now I've got my own show. So if you're tired of lazy takes, if you want honest conversations, join us each week. Film Never Lies, available on all TSN platforms and the iHeartRadio app.